Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Milnor. I'm a documentary photographer based in Santa Fe, New Mexico and Costa Mesa, California. I work primarily on my own projects. I've done documentary work in all parts of the world, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and I also have self-published over 100 of my own books. So if any of that sounds interesting, stick around because Marc Silber is going to ask me a variety of questions relating to specifically this material.
Welcome to the Marc Silber Show, Advancing Your Photography, where we bring you tips from remarkable photographers about how to take photographs you love. Dan, thanks for joining us on Advancing Your Photography.
Thanks for having me.
All right, tell me about your approach to photography and the type of work you really love to do.
Well, the work that I like to do the most is documentary work. So I do long-term, mostly black and white projects, both here in the US and abroad. And most of these are topics that I've dreamed up myself. Most of them are topics that I fund myself. And I go back over and over and over until I have a body of work. And then recently I started self-publishing books of that work. And that's primarily what I work on. I also do a lot of portraiture. I've done a lot of portraiture over the past couple of years, but I'm sort of phasing out of that now, and I'm going to spend as much time as I possibly can working on my own projects on the documentary side.
What are some of the key things that you use every time you pick up a camera or even before you pick up one?
What I do before projects is very similar in the sense that developing the idea of what the project is a critical part. Like, what's the project, what's the story? How am I best going to tell that, which is going to dictate which format, or if I'm shooting digital or film or square or black and white. And I do my research. So I think that's one thing that gets a little bit lost these days is when you do documentary work, a lot of times, you can go and just wing it. You can go somewhere and shoot, and that's a lot of fun. But if you have a specific theme in mind or a specific story that you're going to tell, I think in some cases it's better to do some research up front, which can really maximize the potential you have when you're in the field, especially if you have limited time. So I'll do my research. I'm always taking the same cameras with me for the most part, and I try to keep it simple.
Cool. Do you nail that story down before you go?
I nail it down every single time, and then 5 minutes after I'm in the field, it changes. So I think that's just the nature of doing documentary work, unless it's a time-specific an event. Like if you're covering a political convention or you're covering, a religious festival that's 4 days long, and then you have an idea of what you want to do. That's kind of a story that what I call it has borders on it. That I can see the borders, I can feel the borders, I know what I can expect to see. A lot of the projects I do, documentary-wise, don't have borders. I have an idea or a concept, I do some research, and then I feel my way around in the field. And what typically happens is 5 minutes after I'm in the field, I meet someone, I see something that takes me in another direction, and the story expands. And the difficult part is keeping, some sort of restriction on how big the story gets, because otherwise you can just be, you can basically shoot and never have sort of that intensity that you need to tell the story.
Right. Obviously, we're all trying to come up with images that do tell a story. So what are some things that work for you?
You have to make some decisions as a photographer. You have to make some, I guess, rather painful realizations about telling stories with photographs, which doesn't necessarily mean that every image you make is aesthetically unbelievable or beautiful. A book of 25 beautiful photos might not tell any story at all. So when you realize, okay, the primary goal of this project is to get the point, my concept across, it means you might have to shoot images that are what I call transitional pictures, that may not be aesthetically beautiful, but they give the viewer a little piece of information that they might not know about or might not understand, and it links them back to those really powerful images that are your best work. So again, a book of 25 images or a story of 25, that could be a portfolio more than it is telling a story, and that's a decision you have to make early on.
So Dan, jumping to a whole other area of your photography with kids, what are some good tips for getting great photographs of children?
You have to think like a kid. I'm about 6 feet tall, maybe a little less, and if I approach someone who's 2.5 feet tall, it's a kind of an intimidating thing. So it depends on how you approach. It depends on the dialogue that you have with them. And kids are very inquisitive. So when I initially go to do a kid shoot, I spend a lot of time sitting on the floor with my equipment, and the kids love the equipment and they want to run their hands over it, they want to look through it, they want to see it. It gives them an idea of what's going to happen, and you're basically immediately building some sort of conversational bond with the kids. Once you've photographed a specific person or kid or kids over a period of time, every time you go back, that initial experiment that you had or that initial conversation is just an accepted part of the plan. And so you can exponentially increase, I think, the quality of your work the more times you go back and photograph the same kids. And kids are great. In a 45-minute time span, they will laugh, they'll cry, they'll fall down, and again, it's all right in front of me. They're not hiding anything. You know, kids will tell me, you know, their deepest secret and cry at 5 minutes after meeting them. And that, in terms of photography, is a really powerful thing to be able to experience with them.
Absolutely. Okay, on that point, in terms of engaging your subject and getting the emotions that you're looking for, how do you do that?
It depends on the kind of work. With kids, there's an immediate, like I said, a dialogue that starts from the minute I walk in the door.
Yeah.
I'm continuously talking to them. So in many cases when I'm working in the field, there's an initial conversation before I can begin to shoot. Who am I? What am I doing? What's the purpose of the work? Those are things that you have to establish, you know, before you start, in some cases. Once those are established, I try to pull back because I'm looking for real people doing real things in the real world. I'm not orchestrating. I don't necessarily even want to talk to people because I know that it will control and influence the scene in front of me. And there's something really fun about doing documentary work when you get to a certain level where it's almost as if you can physically make yourself disappear. And I know that's obviously impossible, it sounds funny, but depending on the energy that you're either taking in or putting out, you can very much disappear into a scene.
Right.
And one of the quotes that I hear from people that I've done documentary work with is, you know, I'll show them prints and books of the material to get their feedback, and they'll say, I didn't even realize you were there. And I was this close to them while I was shooting, and it wasn't necessarily a single frame, it was frame after frame after frame, because they're involved in what they're doing, and I'm involved in what I'm doing, but I'm not physically like pushing my energy on them to become a part of the scene. So it's completely different. With kids, I'm putting my energy out there because I want that interaction, and with documentary work, I sort of yo-yo that effect. If I need it, I do it, and if I don't, I pull back.
Gotcha. Okay, in terms of composition, any particular tips?
Because I use the 35, and even with the 50, is I'm always looking for a foreground, a midground, and a background, because I want that lens to build depth in a 35mm image. I don't want a one-dimensional flat photo. I want something close, something in the middle, and something in the background that are all related, and the light working on those three planes. And when you get that, it just gives you a sense of three dimension on a one-dimensional photograph. That's really the key for me.
Any final tips for viewers who just want to become better photographers?
Sure, there's a lot of tips. One is shoot what you like. I think, which seems like a no-brainer, but I think you'd be surprised how many photographers are working on projects that they think they should be working on and not necessarily what they believe or what they feel inside they should be working on. I think that's really key. It's always going to show. Don't rush it. I think today we live in a fast world. We've all got our mobile phones and computers and we're connected all the time. Time frames have been cut and cut and cut and cut, but there is no substitution for time and access in the field. The longer you can spend, the better your photos are going to be. And you know, if you rush it, it's going to show in the work. And the significant people within the photography world, whether it's a curator or a gallerist or a publisher, they will see that, I think, immediately, whether or not you have that connection.
Hey Dan, thanks for joining us on Advancing Your Photography.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
You bet.
Be sure to subscribe to our blog now to stay updated on my show, and we'll give you tips and insight to keep advancing your photography. Also, check out our guests' website for a closer look at their work. Tune in to our next episode of Advancing Your Photography for an inside look at another photographer's world. Until then, this is Marc Silber reminding you to get out and capture your own images of life.